Hello and welcome to Resource Stage for this evening, September 12th? September 12th. Yeah, 2023. So thanks for coming. It's nice to see you guys tonight. Tonight we are talking about microphones 101, and Adam and I were having a conversation earlier on today that he was at the very first Resource Stage seminar back in 2005, and he was there because we were talking about microphones. And I actually just also had a conversation with Adam about whether or not he knew microphones, and he said yes. And he said what I don't know is streaming, and so that's why he just walked right in front of the camera like that. That was good. Are you good? Yeah, okay, he's good. All right, so thanks for coming tonight. Whether you're here or you're watching online, it's great to have you. If you are here, we've got some swag for you. We've got some opportunity to check out some microphones. If you are at home, sorry, you'll have to come next time for swag. So Adam Plant is our sales rep with AKG. There we go. See, you are good at this. He is our sales rep for AKG, which also means that he covers a wide variety of other brands as well, including JBL and Soundcraft and Crown and Martin and what am I missing? BSS, DBX. Anything else? Lexicon. Yeah, so a whole variety of different products. So if you have a question about one of those sorts of things, then we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. But I think that in having this conversation with Adam about what we're going to be doing tonight, he is, I think, really interested in hearing from you as to what it is that you want to know about microphones, and what are some of the things that you're looking to understand better. Does that sound right?
That's correct, Carl.
Thank you very much. That was very good. Without further ado, I will pass this over to Mr. Plant.
All right. I was going to sit down and make it more intimate, if that's all right, but then I realized my laptop's way back there. Okay, so thanks for coming, guys. So the first thing to do is introduce myself. So I've been around for a while. Carl was saying I did the first Resource Stage with him in 2005. I think he forgets how bad it was. That's why he hasn't had me back in 15 years. See, that's a joke. No, so happy to be here. I have a bit of a background in this, not just as a sales rep, but I've been a sales rep for microphones for all of my professional career, selling AKG now and selling some other brands before. But I also own a lot. I've done tons of live sound, often with kind of crappy bands in even crappier rooms, trying to make them sound not crappy. Which is sometimes tough. And I also have a little studio that I run as well. So some of this stuff is actually my collection, some of these guys, and some of these are samples. So, and I do have quite a few microphones. So I think I have a little bit of expertise in that. So I think what we'll do is make sure that we do a little bit of basic stuff, but then make sure we tailor this to whatever it is exactly you need. And Carl, do we take questions from we do take questions. So if you can hand those off to me, that'd be great too. So the whole thing is a little loose, designed to be interactive. So here's a couple of AKG mics, the 214, the 414 XLS, and the 414 XL2. These guys. 414 is a very famous microphone. I'm not sure if you are aware of that mic. You might think it's a studio-only mic. It is not. Absolutely not. And I've got all three of these here, so we'll be able to audition them, talk about the different sonics and the different polar patterns. And on the end, I've got an old 414. It's one of the first mics I ever bought in 95, I think. So that's a pretty cool thing to see the lineage here. But before we get into that, we'll do this stuff. And if this is recap, great. And if not, maybe you'll learn a little bit of stuff. So we talk about, and the reason I do this is because I hear a lot of people say, no, my dynamic mic is cardioid, it's not a condenser. And you're like, oh, those terms are not meaning the same thing. So let's talk about what those terms are, because when you know what the operating principle is, and you know how to read the frequency response chart, and you know what a polar pattern is, you can use a mic a lot better. So first thing is talk about the operating principles. Dynamic mic. You may have seen this picture before about what a dynamic microphone looks like. Here's another version of the same picture, which I think is a little bit better. But basically with a dynamic mic, can you guys follow me on the camera? We've got a magnet, which is this, and we got a copper wire wrapped around it, which is creating an electromagnetic field. And the diaphragm, which is really, really thin piece of mylar usually, here, just moves with sound pressure level, and because it's hooked up to this copper wire, interrupting lines of flux within this magnetic field, and it's outputting a voltage. So that's dynamic. The benefits to this are it's very robust. It's a very mature technology. It's fairly inexpensive to make. It's relatively insensitive to humidity, which this could be a, oh, I bet you that sounded good on stream. This could be a fairly humid environment right in front of a grill. And yeah, I wouldn't say they're indestructible, but they're a pretty robust kind of technology. And that's as opposed to condenser. And you may have seen this diagram before. Here's another picture doing the same thing. So with a condenser, what we have is a backplate which is charged, and then we have this conductive diaphragm in front of it. Sorry, Forrest, can you see there? So once again, sound pressure moves this, but because there's a potential here, there's capacitance built up between this, we're changing the capacitance value of this circuit, and that's how we derive an output voltage. The benefits to this, generally, this diaphragm is 1,000 times thinner than that diaphragm. So, or that's not uncommon, I should say. In microns, right? So this condenser microphone is way more sensitive to high frequencies. It is way more accurate. So there's less, because there's less mass in it. If we back up to this dynamic, it's a big motor that has to run. And they can be slow. You have to overcome the inertia of the mass of that diaphragm. So they don't have as much transient detail, generally. Whereas a the condenser, being so much thinner, can react much quicker. So you see condenser mics used more often on things like acoustic guitars or cymbals or things with really high transient content. That's the general rule of thumb. But it's not to say you can't use anything for anything, okay? And of course, there's another broad category. These, by the way, are all condenser mics. The most common sort of looking dynamic, like what I'm holding, or like that. But we're going to talk about what I'm holding a little bit later. Another common mic is a ribbon, and this old guy is a ribbon. So this is not a AKG mic. This is from a company called AER. I'm sure you've seen this type of mic before. So a ribbon has this thin piece of foil. These are pictures of the same thing. And there's magnets on either side. This piece of foil can be really long, but it's corrugated so that it fits in a smaller cavity. And ribbons don't have to be massive like this. The benefits to ribbons are, because that diaphragm is so long, it has this wonderful frequency response. It's also part of the charm of a ribbon is that it has a very pronounced high frequency roll off. So usually we would say they're dark. It's not always the case, but usually we'd say they're dark. They're also quite a bit more fragile. This is super thin. If you lie it on its side, it can sag. If you lie it on its back, it can sag. So they've got to be stored upright. You've got to be careful about wind blasts for them. Also, this magnet is super powerful. One of the things that ribbon manufacturers talk about all the time is there's going to be dust and junk in the air, and metal fragments, and it could easily stick to the magnet and at some point rip the diaphragm. And that's so often you see with even that's the case with all of these things, that garbage in the air can wreck them, especially if we're breathing on them and we're sort of putting some moisture onto the diaphragm, and now we have a place where dust can glue to it. But with this, it's especially suspect. So Jessica, you're gonna do a little demo for me here. So, and I talk about that, and sometimes you go, "Oh, God, you're just being it's too much, right?" Like they can't really mean that. So this is metal. And there's a magnet in there. So just slowly bring that close to that, and just see how powerful that magnet is. Oh, right, exactly. Eh? That's crazy, isn't it? Like that thing will stick, and that thing will probably stick and stay there. Right? So that is a strong magnet. So the point of all that is, yeah, it's a strong magnet. Take care of your stuff is the point. And whether it's a ribbon mic or something else, take care of your stuff. I've been my whole career selling more microphones, so I like it when you break stuff. That's not true. I like it when stuff is like this and it's old, and or like that mic on the end, which is coming up to its 30-year birthday, and I still use it on every session. I think that's great. So take care of your stuff. Ribbon mics. That's ribbon mic, and then the other thing about ribbon mics is you can't apply phantom power. Have you heard that? You know what phantom power is? Okay, let me back up, because that's a pretty important part of a condenser mic. That back plate, I think I just glossed over that section. The back plate it's charged. It requires power. You can get a thing called an electret mic, which has a power permanently charged to it. But in most cases, we apply power to it. We call it phantom power. We call it phantom power because it is designed to be invisible to dynamic mics, but it powers condenser mics. So the way they do that is there's no difference in potential when they send signal down, voltage down pins 2 and 3. There's no difference in the potential relative to ground on that, and so a dynamic mic doesn't complete the circuit, so it doesn't do anything. With a condenser mic, it completes the circuit, and we have power applied. So the rule is, the theory is, the operating principle is, phantom power doesn't damage a dynamic mic at all, so you don't have to worry about it. However, the way that works is if your cable is balanced correctly. If your cable is miswired and ground is not, pin 2 is not referenced to ground, you will now have voltage going down the wrong pin, and you'll put voltage across the diaphragm of the microphone. So you could damage a phantom dynamic mic with a poorly or miswired cable. Or if you're in a studio setting and you're patching in and out. So if the mic tie lines are on here, phantom power can actually be across the terminal of a TRS. So a TRS jack. So as you momentarily jack in to a patch bay, if there's phantom power engaged on the back side of that, the pin will short out. The TRS jack will short out as you stick it in, and you can now send phantom power across either into the transformer and damage the transformer, or right across the diaphragm. Dynamics are pretty insensitive to that. Ribbons are not, and you could easily fry them. So that's a little blurb from the AEA webpage that makes these guys. So with phantom power, you use it for condenser mics. If you don't need it for dynamic, it's probably just safe to leave it off. But it's not a problem if you turn it on. And a well-designed, any modern design, you should be fine with modern design mic and a modern design cable. Okay, so that's operating principles. There's one more I should briefly talk about, which is PZMs. This is an example of a PZM, which is pressure zone microphone. So you're going to see pressure zone microphones in something like this, which is binaural, and sometimes you see them in the flat mics. So pressure zone is a tiny little subset of a condenser called an electric condenser. That's the mic element right there. You guys can see that. So that, and it's actually facing this baffle. So part of the the principle is that there's a baffle on it. So all the PZMs have a baffle. PZM is a trademark of Crown, but lots of other people use the same technology. The idea here is that there's going to be a reflection. So if a sound source comes in, hits the mic, same sound source comes in, hits the table, hits the mic, there's a phase difference between there. If we can minimize that by putting the microphone capsule as close to a surface as we can, to a boundary, you'll have no phase discrepancy. So in situations where you have maybe choir mics and they sound funny, they sound loud, they sound phasey, they sound like they're thin sometimes, maybe it's because you're getting interference between the mic and a boundary. This is a technique to alleviate that. And sometimes you see PZMs built into a little flat panel that would kind of look like this, but with a little mic attached to it. You can use these for sticking them on the wall. Sometimes people put them on mic stands and face a choir with them. They're a little bit ugly. They're a little bit noisy and a little bit thin sounding sometimes. When you put them closer to a boundary, they get fuller. Another variant of that technique is this guy, which is also made by Crown. This is called PCC, which is phase coherent cardioid. This has a tiny little element in it that's facing forward, but once again, it's designed to sit on a boundary. The element actually creates a hemisphere, so there's no pickup off the from obviously from the deck. The idea here is that you're going to get something that looks like I don't know, coming out at about 45 degrees. This is often used on the lip of a stage. Say you have a kids choir and you've got 40 little voices, and obviously you're not going to put 40 mics up. Or if you put a handheld mic up. So you can put something like this. The design of this particular guy is to eliminate stage rumble, so get rid of all the deck noise, but still have a fairly clear pickup pattern in the vocal range. Carl was saying he's got 2 or 3 of these that are how old? More than 10. More than 20. Proven technology, and it still works. Okay, so that's a couple of variants on condenser mics there. Questions? Dynamic mics, condenser mics, need power, ribbon mics. Yeah, you're getting there. You guys? Yeah. Well, it's okay. PCC or PZM in a drum. So PCC maybe, and PZM probably never. So PZM, I think it'll distort too quick. I think you will get a very unsatisfactory sound. PCC, not this particular version of it, but you do see little mics. So a famous one is a Shure Beta 91, which is looks like a wallet, basically, and it's got a front face cardioid. The reason to do that, honestly, I think, is to eliminate stage clutter. Right now, I'm in danger of tripping over all these mics. You can also get it inside the kick, and you can get a pretty full sound, and you can get a lot of beater attack. You guys done that? You put something inside the kick? The other reason to do that would be consistency. You can mount it. You can have it in the same place so you know what you're going to get. In my experience, it is a great addition. So it's a great way to get more attack, but it doesn't get as much maybe tone. So if you like the tone of your kick drum, a common technique is to supplement. So you might put a boundary microphone inside a kick drum, maybe on a pillow or something, and you might put something else like a D112 or something slightly outside, maybe just poking its nose into the hole of the port, or something like this a little further back. If you're doing studio recording, something like this, 18 inches away, supplemented with something like that is a pretty common technique. Using only a PCC or like a boundary mic inside a kick drum, I find pretty unsatisfying. However, if you're doing some live sound and you just got to throw and go and you just got to get things going quick, it's great. So it's really context dependent, I think. Does that answer your question? Do you use it otherwise? Other ways? You guys know what we're talking about? No. Well, we're just going to talk then. Oh, okay. All right. Polar patterns is the next thing on my list. So I'm sure you've seen... Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so were pressure zone mics used on conference tables? Certainly, that would have started that way, and often they would be maybe sit in the room to get more of the ambient pickup of the whole room. I think today we almost never use that. We use something, a boundary layer mic, but we don't use a PZM mic. We might use something that's more phase coherent, but we certainly use boundary layer mics. One of the things you have to think about with a conference setting, we got a table, and we've got this mic on the table, and I'm reading my documents, and I put my documents on it, and it happens a lot. So the placement of that is a problem, and aesthetics of that are a problem, because there's going to be a cable trailing out of the back of this. And the other thing about microphones, really, is that every time you cut the distance in half, you cut the gain in half, right? So I'm right on this microphone now, but if I just do that, right, I'm way off. And if I put it on a table way over here, right, so you guys can all hear me, but if in most conference room situations we're talking about streaming, it might be terrible. So having a gooseneck mic maybe here is going to be much better for that application. So it's very application specific. The other thing about modern conference rooms is that they're designed by an interior designer who doesn't care about aesthetics, right? So they're all glass and concrete. Oh, they're beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. And then the sun comes up and heats the fishbowl up and everybody's baking in it. And then we have this sound that bounces around everywhere. It's terrible design. So you need Carl to come in and go, okay, well, we're going to put some mics in the ceiling that are going to do like this, and we're going to put some mics on the table that are going to do that, and we're going to process them, and we're going to have some auto mixing and some gating. And yeah, so now, if you have a boardroom in your church facility, for instance, where you need that, and maybe it's an older room maybe it's a library or something, and it's soft surfaces, okay, sure, we can get away with some of that. And maybe you're just doing it for archival purposes, right? You've got a council meeting, and you've got to tape it. Sure, why not, right? That would be a fine application for it. This one that I showed you here is pretty cool. It's called SASP, SASS-P, which was Stereo Ambient Sampling System, and it's actually got two PZMs, one here and one here, and they are that far apart, far as part of my ears, and it's designed to be a binaural microphone, and give a very true representation of the stereo field. It's a little bit thin sounding, so I often supplement it for something. But when I'm doing say a choral recording, I often put this up a third of the way back or halfway back in the church, and that's my reverb, right? Microphone. So we will often go rent a church and do a choir there, or rent Aeolian Hall or something. That thing works really well for that, and it gives us a very uncanny sense of left-right, because everything's out of phase between this mic and this mic. And it's actually it's a stereo mic. There's just two XLR outputs on the back. It's pretty cool. They don't make it anymore. I bought that in like, I don't know, 94, I think. 94, 95, something like that. I got that. I traded a guitar for it, actually. Yeah, I've used it on hundreds of records. It's really cool, Mike. But Neumann makes one actually now called I forget their head mic, and it looks like a head, looks like a mannequin head with two little mics in the ears. I think it's about 10 grand. It's crazy expensive. This wouldn't have been that expensive when it came out, but yeah, it's the concept is still around. And for ambience, and if you're doing Dolby Atmos, there's ambisonic mics which would have they call tetrahedron capsules. So I think there are two figure eights inside, and then you get 4 outputs, and you can mix Atmos in it, this is sort of the precursor to that. But far cry from the church stuff. I don't think you're doing any Atmos mixes for your church, right? Okay, so back to this slide. So this does two things for me. This shows me polar patterns. And I'm sure you've seen this. This is omnidirectional. This is unidirectional. Obviously, it's picking up from this side. And figure 8. And that kind of and the reason I like this slide is because it had a 414 as the model. I didn't like this slide because of what was on the top, which was strange low frequency cutoff, which doesn't make sense. And the reason I brought that, and I'm sure you've seen these guys too. Picture the same thing. Cardioid, an omni. This is a cardioid polar plot. This is a cardioid polar plot as well, obviously traced at different frequencies. This one is a little weird because I don't understand what those things are at the top. And the reason I put that, I was going to chop it off, and then I thought, we have to be suspect with everything we read on the frickin' internet. Because it's not, it's so strange. So, an omnidirectional, this is correct, right? An omnidirectional microphone picks up everywhere. So if this was my microphone, it picks up equally at the front, at the back, at the sides. A cardioid microphone picks up in one direction, and we can show that with this. So this microphone is sensitive here, and it's insensitive here. My lips are as close to the diaphragm as they were here, and there you can hear me, right? And you can hear it as I move around the side. It'll get quieter. So as I come off to the side of this microphone, all of a sudden I'm out of the pattern, right? So there I'm back. So this is unidirectional, and specifically we call that cardioid. We call it cardioid because somebody thought that looked like a heart, so that was cardiac. Honestly, that's it. And then this one is bidirectional, or figure 8, and it picks up equally at the front and the back, but nothing on the sides. So in general, we say this is uncommon live, this is uncommon live, this is common live. And the reason we do that is because we want to have our signal noise, right? I'm the source, I'm the signal. You guys are noise, so pick up me or reject you guys. The biggest application would be monitor placement. You can put a monitor right in this plane, and that microphone is insensitive to it. If we switch over to that guy at the top, supercardioid, that's a variation on cardioid, which is a little tighter. And I'll go to this graph here. The angle of rejection, this is a cardioid microphone. The angle of rejection is 180 degrees, meaning this is 0, what I'm talking into. That's 180. Okay. If we had a supercard, it actually picks up a little bit at the back, and the angle of rejection is here on the sides. So the implication there is that the monitor needs to be over here. So the biggest complaint on supercardioid mics is they feed back. Well, yeah, if you've got your monitor here, it feeds back. If you kick your monitor over to the side, they're going to be fine. The benefit to a supercard over a card is this thing called distance factor. So I can be, say, 1 foot away from an Omni and have a particular tone. I can be 1.7 feet away from a cardioid and have about the same tone. And I can be 1.9 on a supercard, and a hypercard's even more, 2 feet away, and have the same sort of tone. So I'm eating this mic right now. I could be here or here. Well, that's a little dramatic, but you know what I mean. So someone who's a little more shy of the microphone, maybe they can sit back, or someone who's maybe just, if they're sticking right on the mic, this is generally a much more present sound. You get a much more in your face kind of sound. And if you went to with figure 8, you'd have to go right onto the sides. That's an example of shotgun. So shotgun, I guess one of the things we should talk about now is this distance factor thing. One of the things that people think about with this is this mic is going out and getting more sound than this one. And that's a real big misconception, I think. If we go back to that first diagram, little piece of plastic, sound waves are moving it. A microphone hears what it hears. Sound waves just get to it. What makes them different is how much they reject other sounds. So this is rejecting twice as much as this. Okay. One of the things that makes mics, maybe you might like the sound of it. I wouldn't say better, but you like the sound of it better, is because of how graceful off-axis sounds that are in here or in here or in here, how nice they sound. Crappy mics, they may reject a lot, but their off-axis sound is terrible. They sound scratchy or thin or out of phase, and you can hear it. It's weird to say you can hear phase, but what you hear is this. I don't like the way I don't like when I'm speaking and I can hear Jessica singing. I don't like her voice in my mic. Whereas other mics, you might not even think about it. You might just go, everything sounds great. Well, what you're hearing is the off-axis sound, and you're hearing it be out of phase, and as they combine out of phase, and it can sound really crappy. So that's kind of one of the things to think about with that. So that's polar patterns. Does that make sense? Okay. So another thing with polar patterns is this thing called proximity effect. So proximity effect, this is frequency response. You seen this graph on microphones too? So you say this is flat, and maybe that's good in a studio. And we say this is a shaped response. So you can see this kind of ugly relative to this. It's got a high frequency boost and a low frequency cut. On a vocal mic, that might be desirable, because what happens with a vocal mic is something called proximity effect. So that's an effect that happens, and the effect is a bass boost that happens when I get closer to the mic, and it's represented here. So this is a bass boost, and this particular microphone, at about 1 inch, you're getting a, what does that say? 5 dB boost, and about 2 inches you're getting a 7 dB boost, and about 3 inch, about a 1 inch away, 2 inches away, 1 inch away, half an inch away, and touching, you're going to get about a 12 dB bass boost. Okay, so as you get closer to the microphone, the bass comes up like that. So a lot of microphones have low-cut filters to compensate for that, and a lot of microphones have a shaped response. If they're intended to be used like I'm using this, they have a shaped response which automatically compensates for that. So there's an example of a low-cut filter which is switchable, and this is an example of a microphone that just has it sort of built in. So that's not an undesirable thing. And the other thing you can do is a lot of microphones have a little bit of a treble boost, so that as you get in closer to the mic and the bass comes up naturally, it's also boosting the top end. It does make a difference. So the application makes a big or the usage makes a big difference here. If someone's scared of a microphone and they're off it all the time, you're going to experience all this treble boost and none of this bass boost, which is going to thin you out pretty quick. So for instance, if I just take this mic, which I think I sound fairly natural, despite that EQ curve, and I just back off it, so here, well, okay, I'm still in the speaker there, but obviously I got a lot thinner. right? And it's my same voice, and I just come that much closer, and you can hear that the body, I go from boy to man, and there I thin right out again, right? My rule of thumb for especially inexperienced microphone people is to glue it to your chin. Now, I know a lot of people are going, oh my god, popping, popping, popping. I've been talking the whole night, I haven't popped any P's at all, right? But the microphone's been glued to my chin. So I get the benefit of that proximity effect, so I get a little warmer sound. I also get a nice hot signal going into the board. They don't have to worry about cranking the gain as much. And the other thing about that is when it's glued to my chin, I don't start talking to you guys and then get back on the mic and talk to you guys, right? It goes with me. So that's one of my, especially with inexperienced. With experienced talk, that's different, right? If somebody knows what they're doing and they can belt it out and they can be off, and they get loud, and then they get back in and they get intimate, whatever. But when you have inexperienced talkers, I think that's a kind of a neat thing to do. Okay, so that's that's a little bit about frequency response charts. Do you guys have questions about that? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the question is about, this is for the streaming folks. Are these patterns, how do you get to these patterns, right? So a microphone that typically looks like this, like a vocal mic like this, is typically one pattern, and it's usually cardioid or supercardioid. A mic like this is a particular mic that's designed for a drum. It's probably a cardioid, or it might be a supercardioid. And so these are fixed pattern microphones. Often when you get a mic like this, they're switchable. So there's actually switches on the front of these that will change. The one on the end has 4 patterns. So omni, cardioid, supercardioid, and figure 8. These 3, I think, have 7 or 8 pattern or 9 patterns maybe, and this one is a continuously variable. It's on here. You can switch it all through. So the answer is it depends. Most of the time when you buy a mic that kind of looks like that, you'll see it's a switchable pattern. This guy, the 214 here, is a single pattern. It's the baby brother to this. Yeah, I mean, and now, so here's the other thing about polar patterns. The proximity effect is also a function of polar pattern. So a cardioid, an omni mic, this guy, has virtually no proximity effect. You can be right on it, and be a foot away from it, and the bass response stays about the same. So all other things being equal, like if you turn the gain up so you could hear it at 1 foot versus at half an inch, the bass response is about the same. As you get more and more down this way, the bass response comes up. So that proximity effect gets much more dramatic. And by the time you get to something like this, figure 8, the proximity effect is huge. They recommend that this mic you use from about 18 inches to 2 feet away from a singer. Never like this. You can just get so much bottom end. It's crazy. So, but you can use that to your advantage. So, for instance, we just talked about cardioid microphones being preferred live, right? And in general, that makes sense. We're trying to project the PA and only pick up the instrument. I was doing a thing in a church with a grand piano, and we stuck a couple of these inside the grand piano in cardioid mode, and it was just so bassy. We had to put the lid down because it was too loud for the rest of the room. The piano player was loud, but we needed the mics. We needed some presence out of the mics, and we just got way too much bottom end. So rather than EQ it all out and really futz around with crazy EQ curves, because it becomes unnatural, right? I just went to the mics and I turned them to Omni. We had the lid open this much, like on the short stick anyway. All that bottom end boost went away. The piano sounded completely natural. It was fantastic. So you can use that to your advantage. If you're doing two singers, you can use figure eight, right? And have them, we could do Grease Lightning, right? You could do that kind of thing. You could, a common studio technique is to take a figure eight mic and use the null point to get the acoustic guitar but not the singer's voice, right? And then use another mic just to get the singer's voice, and use the null point to get rid of the acoustic guitar. So you can do acoustic, like a singer-songwriter thing, put two mics up and not have a lot of bleed from one into the other. So it's common to use it. So if you know how they're working, it's interesting to experiment with that. The wrong time to experiment with that is 10:30 on Sunday morning, right? So go in and or do something like this. And actually, can you mute me for a sec? I'm gonna throw one of these on. Hey. Okay, so there we are. So this guy now in cardioid mode. So if I turn it around, it's pretty much gone, okay? It might make a little pop. I'll switch it over to figure eight. Okay, so there we are in figure eight. Can you hear the difference in the bass on my voice just by that? So there's an example of that proximity effect coming up. And here we are in the back, so it's about the same. And if I move to the sides, there we are, it's gone. So it's interesting if you can think of, I can use that for, right? A common thing to do with these kind of things is to say, well, we need to mic the snare, but we have too much hi-hat or too much cymbals. The drummer's always on the cymbals a lot. It's just too much. Okay, so let's find a pattern where we can actually mic the snare but reject the cymbals, right? So by placement, you can do that rather than resorting to EQ all the time, right? Oh, you have electronic drums. Anyway, when you get to live, when you get to, I'm just going to switch to Omni, and I don't think we'll have any feedback. So just for reference, there's my radio voice. How does it sound like when I talk like that? And there's omnidirectional. Okay, so right away it's a little bit quieter, and all that bottom end's gone, right? So clearly I need the support. Okay, if you mute me, I'll go back to the. Okay, so that's kind of my little bit about theory. Did I miss anything? Do you want me to go over anything? Okay. So we'll go into kind of my love of stuff. So here's this guy. You recognize this guy? So there's some famous AKG mics. So that's Ringo, and he over his overhead, he's using a dynamic mic. And remember I said you probably use condenser mics for overheads. Ringo uses a dynamic. Although I think if you put any mic on Ringo, it would sound pretty good. They used at Abbey Road, they used at EMI, they used a D19 as overheads. They often used it under the toms as well. And I just so happen to have a real D19 from that era right here. It still works, and I've used it on hundreds of records. So there's a real D19, which is pretty cool. Another mic that was used a lot, there's that other Beatle. John, get off the drums. Terrible picture, eh? That's a D20. That was actually designed as a vocal mic, it's a general purpose mic, I should say. And the guys at EMI realized it sounded really good on kick, and they used on the kick drum. They used on the bass a lot. It went through a few variations. So the famous one was called a D12. a change in impedance and maybe a change in the output connector made it a D20, but it was the same element. AKG reissued this mic called a D112, which you might have seen. It's kind of an egg shape with a green stripe around the front, which is a very common kick drum mic. The slogan is, if you can't make your kick drum sound good on a D112, the problem is probably not the microphone. They also reissued it, another reissue a couple years ago, which is this guy, which is called the D12 VR, which, I mean, that's a terrible picture, but it looks an awful lot like this. This is a slick mic. So this is where, you start to use technology for your own nefarious purposes. So this has got 2 operating modes. In passive mode, it's a dynamic kick drum microphone. It's pretty flat sounding. An awful lot like a D20. Well, a little bit more like a D112, but yeah. If you apply phantom power to a dynamic mic, which I said you don't need, in this case you do, because there's actually an EQ built into here. It's an active EQ, and it activates, there's a little switch on the top, and it activates, and there's 3 EQ curves. And they're the kind of EQ curves that you often use at the mixer anyway. One is a mid-cut, one is a mid-cut with a bass boost, one is a mid-cut with a bass boost and a treble boost. And you can just flick this little switch, and you can get 3 different personalities out of it. So that's kind of an interesting application for using phantom power for something else, right? And in this case, it's to power an active EQ. Yeah. Right. Well, that's a good question. I mean, at some point, you are duplicating something there, right? Part of it for me is that if we know we're going to cut some mids, most consoles are going to have 3 or 4 bands of EQ. Some have lots, right? But most have. Actually, if you can switch to this HDMI. Anyway. Okay. So, like, my mixer has 4 bands of EQ. So I can use those for other creative purposes if I require them. And the microphone's going to have so I think that's the sort of biggest benefit is if you know what you're doing, you could use the EQ for your own creative purposes. If you didn't know what you're doing, this is sort of a awesome preset, right? And right away, and I think anytime you can get the sound right at the source, right? So for me, it's often about mic placement and do I need the low pass filter engaged or not, or in this case, what kind of tone do I like on the mic? And then you can leave it and just not mess with it. Not because I don't know how to EQ things, but because it's one less stage of processing that required. So, one of the things that's interesting is every time we go in and we talk, we put a mic up, you can start to hear the EQ, you can start to hear the processing, you start to hear the PA, you can hear okay. So if I know I don't like that already. No, I'm not this, but the PA already, right? There's some processing inside. You can hear it. If I can do less of that and get more natural sounds, I think we win that way. And if we can do that at the source, and a big way to do that is to think about these polar patterns and what that's doing to proximity effect, right? So do I have too much bass or not? Am I moving the mic in and out, or am I picking up the cymbals? Or can I just turn the mic away and not pick up the cymbals? Electric guitars are another big one. If you're not using like a pod or something, a Line 6, and you're plugging in direct, if you're actually miking electric guitars, you can get right up to an amplifier and it just why does that sound so bassy, right? Well, okay, I know I can back it off a little bit and get rid of that proximity effect. It might be picking up other stuff. Well, maybe I can just angle it a little bit. If I angle it a little bit, maybe that changes the high frequency component as well. as the low frequency component, right? And backing it off maybe changes the low frequency component. If you get the sound right at the source, I think you win a lot quicker than messing with EQ all the time. And I think EQ gets us in a lot of trouble. Can we get this one or not? Okay. Okay. Still no? Okay, so look, I'm not using any EQ on my mic at all right now. And I don't think you guys are using any EQ on the board. Is that correct? No EQ on the board. So if the moment I start getting in here and then you start to lose the plot really quick, right? Like you get these. So for me, it's often about getting the sound right at the source. And if that little EQ switch does it, I'll use it. How's that? That's right. All right. That's a good point on that. This mic, when you guys come up, there's a little hockey stick on here. The hockey stick is a high pass filter, right? It's a low cut. So, and it's at 80 hertz on this mic. So if you don't pay attention to if there's a low frequency cut on your mic, you could easily get into something. Oh, come on, fingers. There we go. So as I engage that high pass filter, right? Now that's pretty high, but so there it is at 100 hertz, and you can hear all that bottom end just went off, and I just bring that back. So that's pretty huge. If you're not paying attention to so high pass filters, good and bad. I tend to, when I'm going live, I tend to engage them on everything by default, and then the things that I don't need them on. So I put everything at 100 hertz, and then I go, okay, the bass guitar needs to be maybe over here, and the kick drum needs to be over there. I tend to use high pass a lot to clean up the bottom end. It also, the thing that makes your PA suck out the fastest is too much low frequency. It just takes all the energy. So if you can't get your PA loud enough, you've probably got too much bottom end. So if you start high passing everything, and you clean and then only let the low frequency go to the things that need it, you're going to likely get more system gain. All right. Can we go back to the other? All right. So we talked about the two Beatles. So that was a D12. So anyway, these guys are here so you can touch and feel them. You can plug them in if you want. This guy, you remember him? Freddie Mercury. There he is with the C414 right there. One of the most famous vocal mics of all time. That's the best-selling mic in the AKG catalog. These guys, the 414s, and that one there. And they're also one of the best-selling mics of this style of all time. Everybody kind of has their thing. Shure has a 58, right? The 414 is the AKG one. So here it is being used with Freddie. I was just out last year at the Genesis concert, and they had these as drum overheads, right? So it's a very versatile mic. That one on the end is mine. As I say, I've had it for 30 years. I've used it on absolutely everything. Pianos, acoustic guitars, drums. It's my favorite mic on a floor tom. And if you guys are miking drums, I put it on a floor tom. This is my floor tom. I put it about here, so way far away. I never put it in close. I put it way far away, and I have it looking at the snare. And it's actually becomes my favorite snare mic because it's about 2.5 or 3 feet away from the snare, and the snare just has all this time to develop and get into that mic. And I usually put it on figure 8, so it's rejecting the cymbals that it's close to, and there's a lot more low frequency naturally. We heard that when we flipped it to figure 8, and when the guy hits the floor tom, it's awesome. And the last one on this little thing here, you remember this guy, one of my faves, Tom Petty. There he is singing into a C12. That's this thing here, which is one of the most famous tube condensers. So condensers can be powered by phantom power. They can also have a tube in the circuit. This is a C12 vintage reissue. So it's actually got a small vacuum tube in here, and they actually have a power supply. This is the power supply for that. And the power supply is the place where I select the polar patterns on this one. That is one of the sweetest vocal mics you'll ever hear. It's just fantastic. Just vocals right up in your face. It's also something like 10 grand. So it's a pretty cool mic. My wife doesn't get this stream, right? No, okay. All right. So I've got some other examples of microphones up here, and I do have my favorite little book, which is my recording the Beatles. And the reason I brought it, it's got a couple of pages on the D19, it's got a couple of pages on the D20, and it's got a couple of pages on the C12. So feel free to, and there's an RCA in there as well. There's all sorts, but feel free to look at that. So okay, so that's kind of what I had as formal presentation. So let's open it up to what you guys need, or we can do listen to mics, or what? Yes, sir. Sure. Can we go to the other screen? Okay, so you have a frequency analyzer going? Okay. So I would have this on the whole time and look at it. You can also download one on your phone, right? So one of the quick things you can do is do a quick cut, and let's say it this one has a cool function called hold. Okay, so let's do it again. So let's say that was our feedback frequency. You grab it, and then you can tighten the Q up when you cut it. So you're only cutting that, right? So that's the quickest way to get rid of stuff. You can do it on the channel level. And what that does is it leaves the rest of the PA alone. So there's a couple things you can do. So I assume what Horizon has done is gone and tuned your room. So they set up a few open mics, maybe the one in the pulpit and the lectern, and maybe the band leader's microphone, and they'll go over to the master EQ and they'll find some frequencies. Turn that on. There it was, and they'll cut that. So there'll be a system EQ that has some cuts to it. So if you cut on the channel only, you're not mucking with the system EQ, because if you start cutting everything on the system EQ, everybody's going to be muddy, right? So you want to fix the offender first. So during a service, the way to do it is EQ and gain, right? But then what you want to do is figure out why. So the thing that makes microphone feedback is that its proximity to a speaker, whether it's the mains or the monitor, and that's it, right? That's the only thing that's happening. So, okay, what happened? Did the person just walk too close to a monitor, or do they do? So that's a common. Okay, well, we just have to say, well, pay attention, right? Or you can't walk off the platform because you'll be into feedback. Another thing you have to contend with in a church is that they're often designed, to seat several hundred people and to have good sight lines, and maybe acoustics was maybe third on that list, right? Maybe 17th on that list. So there are some rooms that are just too reverberant. So you just have to say, well, this is the maximum system gain I can get. So you're getting into a place where maybe somebody's too close to a speaker. Okay, we can fix that. The other thing to think about is how loud were they, right? And why were they too loud? If it's going to be a vocal mic, probably, maybe an acoustic, but maybe not, right? So if we're getting into vocal mics, well, they're too, probably you had to turn them up, and then all of a sudden they're into feedback. Okay, what does that mean? Does it mean that they were too loud, or does it mean that maybe the drums were too loud, or the piano or the guitars were too loud? So finding a system balance between the musicians is really important. So one of the things to work on there is stage volume, bring everybody down, and not bring everybody down for the sake of bringing everybody down, but like when I rehearse with my bands, we will often do an exercise where we don't put a vocal mic on, and the electric guitar players play without amps. So they're just playing their electric guitar unamplified. And then as the piano player, which I am, and the drummer and the bass player, we all have to now listen to those guys, and you have to balance yourself. So now we stop, everybody getting louder and louder. We just, okay, wait a minute, what do I need to do, right? So bring ourselves in, and the most important thing of that is listen to the other person playing. And I think one of the ways to accomplish that, and this is going to be this, I can say this in my band. It's sometimes a little harsh in a band I don't know. Rehearsal is Thursday night, right? Practice is what you do on your own when you learn your parts. Rehearsal is what you do together when I learn your parts. When I learn your part, right? And that's really important. If you're showing up to rehearsal and you don't know your parts, you're going to have to be louder, you're going to be playing louder, you're going to be playing over top of everybody just to hear yourself, and then everyone else is going to do the same, and the whole thing goes up, and now the whole stage volume gets loud. I read a quote yesterday, then Jeff Beck said it, one of the greatest guitar players ever, and he talked about stage volume, and he said, stage volume is the ultimate killer. Like, it's just everything gets loud. You go out of tune. You only start to listen to yourself. You don't hear anybody else, and then you start to forget about where am I in relation to the monitors? Where am I in relation to the PA? How am I playing in relation to how you're playing? So I think a lot of that has to do with group dynamics and bringing it to a sensible level. You can fix it with EQ. But better, you can fix it with playing, right? The other thing to maybe not resort to is overly compressed things. So a compressor is designed to limit dynamic range. So I'm going to go back to this channel. Here we go. So I don't have any compression on now. But what a compressor is designed to do is, as I get louder, well, you heard it kick in there. As I get louder, then the dynamic range gets squashed. So compression is reduction of dynamic range. The benefit to compression is going to be that my quiet stuff doesn't get lost in the mix. And I can, so if I've got dynamic range of something that's really quiet and something that's really loud, and what it works on is the loud stuff. So it reduces the level of loud stuff, and now I can take the whole thing and turn it up. So the byproduct is my quiet stuff comes up. But there's a qualitative difference that happens there because I'm not as dynamic, I'm not as dramatic. And everyone equates emotion with dynamic range. So when I don't have any dynamic range, I don't feel very dramatic, or I can't be as dramatic. So here is a ton of compression happening. You can hear it coming in and out there now. So that's my voice being compressed. And what you might do is turn the whole thing up. And as soon as I start to turn the whole thing up, okay, well, you can hear it. I'm going into feedback already, right? So fixing it with more compression. was a ton of gain. Fixing it with more, I probably overloaded your feed terribly. Sorry. Fixing it with a ton of compression is also completely the wrong thing to do. I think. You probably want to compress things a little bit, so that the quiet stuff doesn't get lost. But you're not going to fix EQ with compression. You're not going to fix a gain thing with compression. The other thing to think about too, with feedback is going to be how am I using the mic. If I'm doing this, he's going to have to crank the gain for me to get anywhere, right? And clearly that's going to open yourself up for feedback. So a lot of it has to do with just looking at things and going, okay, you're 6 feet off the mic. That's a problem, right? Or you're standing right in front of the monitor. Another thing, by the way, we didn't talk about how microphones are made cardioid. So all microphone diaphragms are inherently omnidirectional. Like, how does the diaphragm is just a little piece of plastic, it moves. How does it know to move when I'm talking into it now versus now? Right? So on these guys, they have 2 diaphragms, one facing forward, one facing back, and they, by changing the phase relationship between the two, you can make the microphone unidirectional and alter how much unidirectionality there is, and ultimately up to figure 8. With these microphones, what they do is sound that enters from the rear goes through what's called an off-axis rejection port. This is the axis. So off-axis, there's a hole, so a port, and it's designed that as sound gets into the back, it has to go through a little labyrinth, which delays it, which makes it out of phase relative to sound that comes in the front. So that's how we get unidirectional. So sound is still getting in the back, but it's out of phase. Lots of people like to do that, okay? Because that looks cool. What I just did is close the off-axis rejection ports. So I made this microphone omnidirectional. So now we're in a controlled environment. We don't have it very loud. But if I had a monitor right here, I could easily make it feedback just by doing this. So yeah, there's a reason the mics have a taper to them. I also want to talk about can you use a condenser mic live, right? We talked about these, and these kind of look like studio mics. And when I said, no, you use Dynamics Live. And that's complete fallacy, because this is a condenser mic. This is, in fact, a very similar capsule to this. And it's bright, and it's clear, and it's loud, and we haven't had any feedback issues unless I tried to make them. The other benefit to this is it's really high output. So a high output is, in my opinion, is pretty good when we have inexpensive front end, when we have inexpensive mixers, because you don't have to drive them as hard. We get over the noise floor. So everything has a noise floor. Every piece of electronics has some noise. If we're driving into it really hard, we're going to be into the noise floor all the time. And we also lose if we're at our limit, we lose all headroom. So if you can drive it if the microphone output is hotter, you're not into that noise floor, and you've got room to move. I also think they sound bright and clear. So I'm just going to sort of prove that to you. I reset this EQ. Oh, I had that mid-cut. So we got no EQ on. We got no compression. There we go. No compression. Okay. And so that's what you've been basically hearing all night. I'm going to take another famous mic. Okay, so that's exactly the same settings. That's okay, so there we go. Yeah, exactly, right? So what I'll do is go in and I'll put, so you can see where it's minus 20 and minus 20. Let me just unmute this other guy. So my input gain on the Shure is set up at 20. My input gain on the AKG is set at 20. So I'm going to put a bunch of gain into the other one. So there's 14 dB more into that than into that. And you can, so we're peaking around the same place. Hello, hello, hello. There we are. Okay. You can still hear the qualitative difference in the two microphones. right, from there to there. And that's just flat. So we haven't done any sweetening at all. So that's not to knock on this. And also, it's not an apples to apples comparison because this is $900. This is, I don't know, $150. So 150, I should say. So let me just mute that guy. But you can certainly understand why you might want something like this, and especially if you're buying one or two of them, right? You can have something that's going to sound stellar and it's going to put that most important element, which is the message, right in somebody's face. So this is I have come onto this recently, and I really, really like the thing. Okay, I think that's it for that. Yeah.
So you're saying that would be a good pulpit mic?
You could put this on a little stand and put it on a podium. I think it would work great. There are wireless capsules that you could put on wireless transmitters as well. Yeah, I think it would be nice. You might prefer. So it depends on if everything's stationary. You might prefer a gooseneck from an aesthetic standpoint, and from especially if there's readings and things that you have to a handheld mic on a little stand is awkward. But yeah, I think it would be and obviously the polar pattern is super tight, right? Yeah.
The people who aren't used to using a microphone or too far back and that, and you're trying to boost things.
You've got a lot more gain.
You got more
and
gain.
then if you can, with all the other things you need to do in terms of placement and EQ and system EQ and also channel EQ, you can certainly, theoretically, you should have a lot more gain before feedback. You certainly have a lot more gain, right? And I think there's a tonal difference too. The shape of the high frequency and the quality of the mid range, which I think is where the meat of my voice in particular is, right? So this is certainly a good vocal mic for me.
The other thing you haven't touched on at all yet tonight is headset and lavaliers.
Right. So if you have a minister that moves around a lot, the headset is a fantastic option. Mainly because of that, right? The microphone will move with them. Headsets are often omni, and that's fine because when they're right on your face, they become a hemisphere. So it becomes a similar operating principle to this, right? Often you don't want to bring a headset right around the front because you get too many plosives. So wearing a headset off to the side is smart. Make sure that you clip it properly because they will fly off your ear. The other thing you can do is buy a dual ear clip. I think that's a smart thing to do. Some companies make a lot of noise about how waterproof they are, which is a smart thing too, or maybe how resistant to makeup they are. Those are smart things to think about. But yeah, headset mic is great. Probably not the greatest great for speech, right? Probably not the greatest for vocal performance. A lot of vocal performance is going to be using this proximity effect to your advantage, right? So you can be on it, you can be off it, you can be loud, you can work it. And a lot of singers' techniques involve touching something as well, right? So apart from sort of theatrical applications where it's a good performance piece, rock and roll kind of performance, I think you go with a handheld. But yeah, for that, and a lapel mic can be amazing too. Once again, it's really down to placement, right? A lot of people will place it right here, and that's not usually very good because you can get like breath coming down and blat the diaphragm out and just and everything sounds terrible. So often slightly off to the side. What's called a lapel mic for a reason, right? And in some broadcast applications, they actually turn them upside down. And especially if it's an Omni mic, sounds great. You see that if you watch the news, you'll see a guy with his lapel mic upside down. So if you're doing broadcast stuff, you can use that as well. And it's the same thing about making sure it's securely clipped, right, so that it doesn't pull off with costume. And you got to pay attention to what the person's wearing, right? So in a theater application where everything's controlled, it's awesome, right? You can sew it into the costume. It's in the same place, or sew it into the wig, or sew it into the glasses, or something. When you've got a different user every week, it's a little more suspect, right? I guess the nice thing about it is that a person might be less self-conscious. I think this is a more controlled environment, though. Yeah. What did you want to say about lapels?
What do I want to say about lapels? I could talk about lapels for a long time. It is interesting. We have had some clients who are live tribute artists, and they will wear earset microphones for everything because they're using microphones that are really more props than they are real microphones. And then there's also situations where they're changing out costumes and that kind of thing, and continuity by having a microphone that's close is really good. But again, it's picking the right microphone for the application. The microphone that we might sell to a church for primarily for speech that's an earset does not necessarily mean that that's exactly the same one we might sell you for a vocal application that you need an earset microphone for, because they have some different qualities, including different acceptable SPL levels, that sort of thing. So, and a lot of the more reputable brands of earset microphones and lavalier microphones will have different options as to, maybe not reputable brands, but ones that have a wider breadth of catalog will have different options for different SPL levels. So that's kind of interesting. You mentioned that lots of people with lavalier microphones will, in broadcast applications, they might go on upside down. I had a situation where I had a vice president of a well-known bank come running into a project an hour late. He said, I know how to put the microphone on. He put the microphone on upside down. It then fed back through the entire event, and I got in trouble because I didn't put the microphone on him. He was too busy to. And what was I supposed to do? He's the vice president of the bank.
You should have said, I know how to do all my investments.
Yeah, I should have. Yeah,
I know monetary policy
the
same way you know microphone technique.
I should have fixed it. That's exactly what I should have done. But it's exactly that. It's knowing what the microphone is. And to him, he thought he was using a omnidirectional microphone for an interview, and we were using a cardioid microphone for a live application. So it was a different sort of thing.
That's another reason why I say this, I think, is a much more controlled environment.
Yeah.
I also had a talking head at a church once, and he insisted on not using the handheld. He wanted the headset. And he put the headset on, and it immediately caught. I shouldn't say immediately because I was already gone. It caught on his clothing, and the headset was like this the whole night. And it looked ridiculous, but B, it was terrible. So now I'm confident enough to walk right up and just, I gotta fix this and fix it. And that, for me, that's fine. But if you're not confident enough to do that, or perhaps the event doesn't allow that, you have to wait for a break or something. Boy, it's right. So controlling your environment is a good thing.
There was a question online that was a good one, and what sort of microphone is best used for congregational response for things like live stream or for recording, that kind of thing? We will typically talk about using condenser microphones, but I think that there is no kind of silver bullet when it comes to a lot of these applications. A lot of times it's let's look at the space, let's look at where we can put a microphone, that kind of thing.
So so to pick up the congregation during call and response? Yeah.
Yeah, call and response, or
But not
even
to
just
amplify it.
congregational singing. That's yeah. Sorry, yes, not. I
Right.
don't believe that the question was about for amplification in the room or reinforcement in the room, but more for
Right.
recording and for streaming.
So with any modern mixer now, there's oodles of outputs, right? So you can easily put a microphone in and not send it to the main PA and send it out to the streaming feed or something. So that's simple to do, and in that case you can use whatever, right? A hanging mic, maybe they need to be discreet. I think we just did that for a church, and I think you sold them the mics, Carl, where we did some PZMs right at the back wall. And actually, one of the things that we did that was interesting is we put some mics. This one church, we put some mics hanging, I think, way up in the ceiling. Of course, they weren't feeding the PA, but they were feeding the in-ears, because the priests have a habit of turning their bell packs off and then I think maybe the programmer had put some gates in, so things would go quiet and be muted, and people who had in-ears, like a hearing assist, I should say, or maybe on the live stream too, when all of that, then the gate would engage, or the wireless mic would be turned off. Now we're outputting silence, and I could see. I sat in the congregation and watched, and some people would futz with their belt pack because they thought it had turned off, and then all of a sudden someone would start talking and blow their head off because they cranked the thing up. So we left some mics in the ceiling, just always on, feeding that in-ear, or that hearing assist, just so they could hear the rustle, so they could hear coughing, they could hear. Okay, I know I'm still in the space, right? And it'd be same for a streaming for a feed as well. You guys want to play with some mics? Yeah. Well, come on. What else?
No, I was just going to say, are there any other questions from in the room? I think that I've asked if anybody has any other questions online. I didn't see anything come up as of this point.
Okay, you have any? What's next for you guys? You're in a church service on Sunday. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So one of the best ways to learn this stuff, in my opinion, is to try and break it. And I don't mean blow your speakers up, but if you can go in on a Tuesday night, right, and there's nobody around, and turn some mics on and start to make the feedback, right? And if you can start to go, good, that's up. So if you can turn the RTA on, which is this guy, and you can start to make it feedback and start to hear where you get, ooh, well, let me turn on, ooh, and you say, oh, okay, what is that? And then you can dial this thing over, and then read the frequency response and go, oh, that was 400 hertz. See, 398. And then do another one, and like make it, and then listen, and then try to figure out what frequencies it are. If you there's stuff you can download actually where you can listen to tones and you can hear frequencies. So when you start to hear, and you go, oh, that's 2K, right? Oh, that was 1K, I think. How did I do? 1K. What's that? 981. All right. So, if you can start to hear that, right? Train yourself to hear that. You're going to be so much faster on your EQ, right? So, but you can't do that on Sunday morning, right? Yeah. So get in there and just use it, right? And just and feel, okay, how much low frequency can I push until it's too much? Oh, okay, right? Oh, okay. And where do you bring that up? Where is that level, right? Do stuff like open the drum kit mics up, open the piano mics up, open all the live, and everything changes with people in, right? But sure, yeah. But absolutely, yes. But everything changes when there's a congregation. If you have an empty room versus a full room, that all changes. But if you can learn how your room responds, right, and you're only going to do it empty because you're not going to convince 1,000 people to sit there while you make things feedback. But if you can do that, try to break it, right? That's the best for me, right? like my wife would, what are you listening to? And I've got headphones on and I'm listening to tones. She goes, you're the weirdest guy I know. I'm like, yeah, well, my shit doesn't feed back. So, you know. Okay. And what do you guys have coming up next? Yeah. Nothing weird. Do you do acoustic guitars unamplified? Or on without pickups, I should say. Like, do you mic acoustic guitars or do you use pickups? Okay. So the things you're using mics on are vocals, the electric guitar, or no? And electric. Yeah. Okay. And you can experiment. I mean, get a short stand and experiment changing the tonality and moving it out farther will get warmer. Moving it in closer to the cone of the speaker will get brighter. Moving it back and forth will change a little bit. I mean, you often see rock and roll guys have a piece of tape on their amp on the cabinet somewhere, and it's because somebody spent the time to do that and go, that's where it sounds the best. Let's mark it, right? And then but yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And draping over is fine. You're actually off axis at that point, right? So you're instead of being like this, the microphone's like that, right? And so there's definitely a quality difference between that. So if your guitars are sounding thin, maybe you change the angle of the microphone, right?
So
what you got going next? Wait, there's one more.
Oh, well, okay. Sorry. Sure, I'm gonna give you
What did you say?
We do a bunch of different shows, so it's like comedy, concerts, like basically anything. But I have a variety show coming up.
Yeah.
So whole band and a lot of dancing, essentially.
So high pass filters are going to be your friend, especially if there's a lot of dancing. There's a lot of this, right? So you can put those low cuts. You can do them on the mic. You can do them on the console. If you do them on the mic, there's a benefit because the low frequency is cut here and it doesn't thump in your preamp, so it doesn't overload your preamp ever, right?
I don't think we have any mics that have.
Okay. So then do them at the board. That's
okay.
fine, right? But that's the first thing I would always look at, and with variety shows, I mean, one of the things too is not to get too dialed into this guy's mic, and it's always I've got this dialed in, and then because the next person comes on and they're completely different. Their voice is different. The resonant frequency of their chest is different. They sound it. So sometimes you're going to have to be at least willing to get your EQ curve flatter again quicker, right? And go, okay, hang on, we can. Just because it worked on the first guy doesn't mean it's going to work on the second guy. The worst is with drum kits because every drummer hits different. So you get that drum kit dialed in, and then the next guy comes in, you're like, ugh, sounds terrible again. And it's not you, right? It's just that they're different. So yeah.
On occasion, at the church, we get rentals that come in, and a lot of them are dance groups. If I wanted to mic the stage to pick up tap dancing better, like large tap groups.
So this is the kind of thing I would look at. Although you can easily take a couple of mics and do that, just point them at the stage, right? And that's fine. Once again, so and is it for amplification or is it for just streaming?
It's largely used for video recording,
Okay.
but it would be nice because I know when I'm operating, I have to cut the house music way back and then bring up the monitors so that they can hear themselves or hear the music, so that we can get the right balance. But it'd be nice to bring out the tap without cutting out the house.
So one of the things to experiment with would be to where can you put those mics, right? So I mean, typically we put them right at the front of the stage because that's what we think we got to do, and it's right in line with the PA. And now we got to crank it, and it's just this proximity from here to here is just ridiculous, and then we're into feedback. So maybe you can put it mid stage, right? And you can because you're picking up noise, the placement isn't really, I mean, how do we make a tap shoe? It's not really that important. I mean, you can put it sort of, but whether it's front or back or whatever. But one thing I would say is if you get it down like this, close to the floor, you're going to so one of the things I found with that kind of thing is you got to roll off a lot more of the bottom than you think, because you get a lot of that boom coming through anyway. So you do that, and if you have it up high, have you noticed you get a lot of high frequency feedback? Sometimes you get it's just that the tap can be really bright, and you get that crack. So, and a lot of that's going to be out of phase. Like there's not going to be a lot of phase coherency, because, I mean, we are talking now, when we talk about my voice bouncing off this table and going into that mic as opposed to going here to here, well, that's hardly any sound pressure level relative to a tap shoe, right? So there's a huge out of phase component, right? There's a huge bounce path differential. So if you can get that microphone a little closer to the floor, then you're going to minimize that. And I think you'll probably get more, you can get more transient detail without having to boost any top end, maybe even roll some back if it's getting too bright for you. And if it's something you're doing reasonably often, then it's probably worth investing in something like that, you can put a couple of those across the lip, maybe 2 or 3 across the lip of the stage. One of the rules with multi-miking things, by the way, is if you can get away with less, you do it. I make all my money on you buying more mics, so I'm going to tell you to buy a little less. It's the more open mics you have, the more potential for feedback you have, the more potential for phase discrepancies you have. So if you can get away with 2, if miking your choir or miking 2 across the front, do that. If you need 3, because I think you guys have a big semicircular stage, right? So, yeah, do that. Yeah. How about you guys?
I think that what Adam is saying, though, is that he's happy for you to buy less mics, but that's
more
a $900
often.
mic as opposed to $150 mic, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Less,
Okay.
That's right. Less $900 mics.
So we're not talking. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, let's not get crazy, Carl. I gotta eat.
Yeah, I know for sure. All right, so thank you very much. I think we're going to close off the stream side of things for tonight, and then I think you're going to open up the floor to come and take a listen to a couple microphones and play around with a couple things. Okay, cool. So if you are watching online, thank you very much for joining us. I apologize. I got to some of the questions a little bit tardy this evening. I'll try to do better next month. So actually, speaking of next month, our seminar in October is going to be on lighting control. And we do a lot of lighting. Sometimes people think that we only work in video, and other people think we only work in audio, but we do a ton of lighting as well. And we do a lot of lighting for a number of community theaters, professional theaters, churches, schools, all kinds of things. And so one of the things that we have not had a chance to really dive into in a resource stage seminar is specifically looking at ETC consoles. So we've talked about ETC in the past, we've talked about them in general terms, but with the number of schools, churches, community theaters, professional theater clients that we have that use EOS operating system consoles, so let's see if I can get this right. That would be a Nomad software package, an Element 2, an Ion, a classic Element also, I suppose, Ion XE, XE20, Geo at 5, Geo, EOS Classic, EOS TI, EOS Apex 5, 10, or 20. If you use any of those consoles, thank you, Logan. If you use any of those consoles, we are going to start with kind of a basic overview next month. And the idea is that we're going to take you from, oh, look, that's the lighting console over there, I'm scared to touch it, to, hey, I can turn some lights on. That's what we're shooting for. We're not shooting to get you to the point where you're going to necessarily go and try to get a union card and go and work at Stratford, but we'll at least get you to the point where you can turn some lights on, and hopefully that's helpful. So if you are or know somebody who is an EOS user or would like to be an EOS user, then come on out to that next seminar. We're going to have some consoles set up in here and looking at that. And of course, you can always stream that online. So that is in October on the second Tuesday of the month. And I think that's it for tonight. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, sir, to the live stream folks? All right, thank you very much. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Adam. Thanks for joining us. If you come across any questions that you would like to have answered that you think of, in the middle of the night or in the next couple of days, and you would like to, send us an email, send us a note online, and go ahead and ask, and we will, if we can't answer it, we'll certainly get it to Adam and see if he can help us out. Obviously, Adam is pretty passionate about recording and live sound and microphones. He's a great guy to have out here tonight. Thank you very much for joining us online, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks. All right.